My name is Arthur Hartman, and at 63, I discovered that the most profound form of retribution isn't found in loud arguments or overt aggression. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. No, the most devastating revenge is a dish served cold, crafted with patience, executed with precision, and savored with the quiet satisfaction of watching your adversaries orchestrate their own downfall. This is the tale of how I transformed my grand home into an inescapable snare and my son-in-law into a federal inmate. I feel it's necessary to begin by describing the estate. Not because the bricks and mortar are the heart of this story, but because without the sheer scale and presence of the place, none of the subsequent events could have possibly unfolded. The sprawling grounds of the Willow Creek Estate cover 12 acres of flawlessly manicured lawns, nestled in the most prestigious corner of Meadowland Hills. It was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture, boasting intricate hand-carved moldings, a grand ballroom that could comfortably entertain 50 guests, and a sufficient number of bedrooms to accommodate a small platoon. When it appeared on the market last spring, a deep, instinctual certainty took hold of me. It had to be mine. At my age, I've come to understand that money possesses a voice more commanding than any other in this world. And after 3 decades of transforming my late wife's humble construction business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, I had a great deal to articulate. "You're buying what?" my daughter Danielle had questioned, her voice laced with disbelief when I shared the news of my acquisition. "Father, that estate is cavernous. What could you possibly want with 14 rooms?" "I want precisely what I want, Danielle," I had answered, my hand moving to adjust my tie with a deliberate slowness that typically signaled the end of such discussions. "And what I desire is space, absolute privacy, and the tangible knowledge that I have earned something magnificent." She had fallen silent after that. In that particular way she always did when confronted with the reminder that her comfortable, work-free existence was funded entirely by my largesse. Danielle was 41 years old and had never known a day of labor that I hadn't personally arranged for her. Her husband, Clay, had married her for her inheritance, a truth that hung unspoken but acknowledged between them. The closing was scheduled for my birthday, October 15th. I had orchestrated it that way with intention. Some men commemorate their birthdays with expensive watches or fishing trips to Alaska. I commemorated mine by acquiring the most breathtaking residence in 3 counties. I will never forget the sensation of walking through those immense solid oak doors for the first time as the rightful owner. The sharp click of my dress shoes echoed against the marble of the foyer, the sound ascending to the cathedral ceiling a full 20 feet above me. Sunlight, fractured into a kaleidoscope of colors, poured through the stained glass windows, painting vibrant, shifting patterns across the Persian rugs I had already chosen for the space. This was more than a mere house. It was a declaration, a monument to a lifetime of survival and accomplishment. You see, I wasn't born into wealth. My father was a mechanic, his hands permanently stained with grease. My mother was a librarian. I grasped very early on that the world does not simply offer you things on a silver platter. You must take what you require, armed with intelligence, unwavering determination, and the fortitude to be more resilient than anyone else around you. When I married Teresa Hartman at 22, she was a budding contractor with more ambition than capital. I didn't merely support her business. I was the architect of its success. While she charmed clients and supervised construction sites, I was the one who meticulously managed the financial ledgers, shrewdly negotiated contracts, and made the critical strategic decisions that elevated Hartman Construction to become the most coveted firm in the entire state. Teresa passed away from a sudden aneurysm 8 years ago, leaving me with a considerable fortune and a daughter who had never been taught to value either the struggle or the success. Danielle had been raised in a world of comfort and privilege, conditioned to expect that everything would be handed to her, as it always had been. And then she brought home Clay. Clay Pierce was 34 years old, with the kind of perfectly coiffed hair that requires a team of stylists, and handsome in that studied, deliberate way of a man who realized early that his looks were his most valuable currency. He had a brief career as a luxury car salesman when he met Danielle, though I always suspected his fascination with high-value assets was more personal than professional. From the very first day he became part of our family, Clay began taking a silent inventory, not just of Danielle's trust fund, but of every single thing I possessed. He had a particular way of gliding through my previous home, a respectable but far more modest colonial, his fingers lightly brushing against my belongings as if he were already mentally arranging them in his own future home. "This Lenox china set is exquisite, Arthur," he would coo, his manicured fingers tracing the delicate pattern on my grandmother's dinnerware. I certainly hope Danielle understands how fortunate she is to be inheriting all these wonderful family heirlooms someday. Someday. He spoke the word as if my inevitable demise was a scheduled appointment on his calendar, neatly penciled in between his golf lessons and trips to his tailor. But Clay had made a profound and critical miscalculation. He had wrongly assumed that because I was older, I was consequently weaker. He had misinterpreted my civility as frailty, my quiet observations as tacit approval. He was on the verge of discovering just how grievously he had misjudged me. The day after I officially moved into the mansion, I was in my new study, the scent of old leather and paper filling the air as I arranged my book collection, when I heard voices drifting up from the foyer. I instantly recognized Clay's laugh, that high, slightly forced sound he produced when he was particularly pleased with himself. "Oh my goodness, Mom, can you even fathom this place?" he was exclaiming. 14 rooms. And that's not even including the staff quarters. Staff quarters! I moved with quiet purpose to the top of the grand staircase, finding a position in the shadows of the landing where I could peer down into the foyer without being seen. Clay was in the middle of conducting what looked like a comprehensive tour for his entire family. His parents, Leonard and Rebecca Pierce, were staring up at the massive crystal chandelier with the wide-eyed wonder of tourists in a grand European cathedral. His younger sister, Jessica, had already made herself at home, lounging on my antique settee with her scuffed sneakers propped carelessly on the mahogany coffee table. "The primary suite is just unbelievable," Clay went on, gesturing dramatically toward the staircase. "California king bed, a separate sitting area, and a bathroom that's larger than our entire condo." He paused for effect. "Danielle and I are considering taking that one when we move in." When they move in. Not if, but when. "Are you certain about this, sweetheart?" Rebecca Pierce inquired, though her gaze was already busy assessing the monetary value of the paintings on the walls. "I mean, it is Arthur's house." Clay waved a dismissive hand. "Please. He's nearly 70 years old and rattling around in this huge place all by himself. It's completely impractical. Besides, Danielle is his only heir. All of this is destined to be ours, eventually anyway. We're simply moving the timeline forward a bit." "But what is Arthur's opinion on this arrangement?" Leonard Pierce asked, a hint of caution in his voice. "Arthur will do what is best for the family," Clay stated with a chilling confidence, the kind that can only be cultivated by a lifetime of never being told no. "And what's best is for Danielle and me to be here, to look after things. He's getting too old to manage a property of this magnitude." Too old. There it was. The unspoken assumption that had been the subtext of every single one of our interactions for the past 3 years. Clay didn't just covet my home. He wanted me gone, out of the picture entirely. I stood there, frozen on the landing, listening as they dissected my life, my home, and my future as if I were already a ghost in my own house. And in that moment, I felt something inside my chest solidify. It wasn't anger. Anger is a hot, fleeting emotion that leads to careless errors. This was something colder, something far more enduring. This was the conception of a plan. I retreated back into my study, closing the heavy oak door with a soft click. From the sanctuary of my desk, I could still hear their voices as they moved through the house. Clay pointing out various features with the proprietary air of someone who was already the master of the estate. The library could become Jessica's art studio, he was saying. And this solarium would be just perfect for Mom's orchid collection. They were carving up my home like buzzards, divvying up a fresh kill. And the most profoundly insulting aspect of it all was the casual, confident manner in which they did it, as if my approval were nothing more than a minor administrative detail to be dealt with later. I opened my laptop and began to type, creating a new document. It was not a list of my grievances. I was far too pragmatic for that. It was a list of actions, of steps, of strategies. First, I needed to fully comprehend the scope of Clay's intentions. How far did his schemes extend? Who else was complicit? What was his proposed timeline? Second, I required evidence. Whatever retaliatory action I took would have to be completely unassailable both legally and ethically. Third, I would need to assemble a team of allies, the right attorney, the right security firm, the right individuals in the right places to guarantee that when I finally made my move, the repercussions would be both severe and permanent. By the time Clay and his family departed that afternoon, their car disappearing down my long, winding driveway, I had the framework of a strategy that would turn their own avarice into the very instrument of their undoing. That evening, the phone rang. It was Danielle. "Father, Clay mentioned that you seemed a bit stressed by the move. He's worried about you managing such a massive property on your own. Is he now?" I kept my tone perfectly level, a placid sea belying the storm beneath. How very considerate of him to be so concerned. We were thinking, perhaps it might be a good idea for us to move in with you. Just for a little while you get adjusted. Clay could help with the household management, and I could handle any maintenance that comes up. Temporary. Of course, it would be temporary, just until they could devise a way to make it permanent. That's a very generous thought, Danielle, but I'm managing quite well by myself. But Father, the house is just so enormous. It seems selfish to keep it all to yourself when your family could benefit from it. Selfish. The word hung in the air. I interrupted her, and for the first time in many years, I allowed a sliver of the steel I'd forged in boardrooms to enter my voice. Danielle, I purchased this house with the money that I earned through a lifetime of work. I will reside in it in precisely the manner I choose. The profound silence that stretched over the line spoke volumes. Danielle wasn't calling out of genuine concern for my well-being. She was calling because Clay had instructed her to. Of course, Father. I didn't mean to suggest. I just thought. You thought what exactly? Nothing. Never mind. We'll speak later. After she hung up, I sat in the deep leather chair in my new study, surrounded by the books it had taken a lifetime to acquire, and I allowed myself a small, thin smile. It was not a pleasant expression. Clay Pierce wanted to engage in a game with a man he perceived as too old and frail to fight back. He was about to learn that 63 years of life experience included a masterclass in how to utterly dismantle those who underestimated you. The war for my mansion was about to commence, and I had every intention of achieving a total and unconditional victory. Dear viewers, before we continue with Arthur's story, I need to share something important with you. If you have ever been told that you're too old to start anew, let me assure you that is a falsehood. Your story is not finished, and there are still many chapters left for you to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. The strategies in this book aren't just theory. They're the same tools that help men like Arthur turn their pain into power. Don't let anyone convince you that your best days are behind you. Now, let's see how Arthur begins to construct his trap. The following morning, I was awake before the first hint of dawn. The sky outside my window, a soft, pre-dawn gray. I brewed myself a cup of strong black coffee, served in my late wife's favorite mug. Because even in the midst of preparing for war, one must maintain standards. As I sat in my breakfast nook, watching the sun cast its first golden rays over my perfectly landscaped gardens, I started to map out my campaign with the same methodical precision that had been the cornerstone of my fortune. Clay Pierce had made the quintessential error of equating age with infirmity. He had mistaken my politeness for pliability, my quiet demeanor for acquiescence. What he failed to grasp was that every successful businessman learns to conceal his true intentions behind a facade of geniality. I had been perfecting that art for 40 years. My first call was to Marcus Sloan, a retired federal judge who had been my closest confidant since our daughters attended the same private school in Connecticut some 30 years ago. Marcus was 71, with a mind as sharp as a tack, and had spent decades on the bench observing entitled individuals attempting to manipulate the legal system for their own gain. "Arthur, my friend, how's the new palace treating you?" Marcus's voice boomed over the phone, carrying the warmth reserved for old friends, and the unmistakable authority of a man who had spent a lifetime making decisions that altered the course of people's lives. "It's beautiful, Marcus, and apparently highly coveted," I replied. "I need your counsel on a legal matter. It's family trouble, son-in-law trouble, which is always the most complicated kind." Marcus let out a low chuckle. "Ah, the one who married Danielle for her inheritance and is now casting a greedy eye on your assets. What has he done now?" I recounted the events of the previous day. The uninvited tour, Clay's casual declarations of future ownership, and Danielle's pathetically transparent attempt to negotiate a temporary living situation. "So, he's probing your defenses," Marcus concluded when I had finished, his legal mind immediately dissecting the situation. "Seeing how far he can push before you push back. It's classic predatory behavior. I want to push back so hard that he never gets up again. Legally speaking, what are my grounds for action? That's the issue we need to establish. But Arthur, I want this to be final. I want consequences that will shadow him for the rest of his life, not just a momentary embarrassment that fades after a few months." "In that case," Marcus said, his voice turning serious, "you need concrete evidence of actual criminal wrongdoing, intent to defraud, conspiracy, trespassing, something that results in a criminal record, not merely a civil disagreement." "How do I obtain that kind of evidence?" "You let him hang himself," Marcus advised. "Give him enough rope and ample opportunity, and he will commit the crimes all by himself. The crucial part is ensuring that you document every single move he makes with absolute perfection." After my call with Marcus, I contacted a private security firm that specialized in high-end residential installations. By noon, I had scheduled a comprehensive security assessment for my new home. The technician who arrived was a sharp young man named Tyler Walsh, probably not much older than my own daughter, but he possessed a level of competence that Danielle had never managed to acquire. He moved through the mansion with a quiet, professional efficiency, identifying vulnerabilities and proposing solutions. Mr. Hartman, a property of this size, requires a serious security protocol. We're talking about a minimum of 24 cameras, motion sensors on every window and door, and a central monitoring system that will alert both you and our dispatch center to any unauthorized entry. I want the most extensive system you have, I told him, my voice firm. Cost is not a factor. We can also install voice-activated recording devices in the principal rooms. It's completely legal, provided it's your own property and you're not recording private conversations without the consent of at least one party, which in this case would be you. Perfect. How quickly can this be installed? We can have a full crew here tomorrow morning. The entire installation should take no more than 2 days. Excellent. And Tyler, I added, meeting his gaze, I require absolute confidentiality on this matter. No one is to know about this security upgrade except for you and me. He gave a slight, understanding nod. Wealthy clients always had their reasons for demanding secrecy. That afternoon, I paid a visit to my lawyer to update my will and to put in place several new legal safeguards for my property. Then, I stopped by my bank to shift some investments, a process that would create a paper trail that I knew would prove useful in the days to come. But the most vital part of my preparation was psychological. Over the next few weeks, I would have to inhabit a role. The aging widower, perhaps a touch overwhelmed by his grand new surroundings, possibly even grateful for the supposed help of his family. It would be a performance worthy of an Oscar. But I had been honing my acting skills in boardrooms and negotiations for decades. That evening, the phone rang. It was Clay. "Arthur, I hope you don't mind, but I gave your address to my mother. She is so thrilled about your new house and would be absolutely delighted to see it sometime." "Of course, my boy. Your family is always welcome here." "That's so kind of you. Actually, we were thinking of dropping by this weekend. Perhaps we could bring some dinner over. Make a real family evening of it." "That sounds lovely. Wonderful. And Arthur, I've been thinking about what Danielle said, about us helping you settle in. I know the house must feel immense right now." "Oh, it is certainly larger than what I'm accustomed to," I replied, carefully injecting a note of feigned uncertainty into my voice. "Exactly. That's precisely why I think it would be so advantageous for you to have family close by. We could take some of the burden off your shoulders, assist with the management of the household. I have a great deal of experience with property management from my time selling luxury cars." "That's very thoughtful of you, Clay. I'm just worried about you rattling around in all that space by yourself. It can't be good for you, rattling around, like a loose cog in a machine that was about to fail." "You might be right," I said, choosing my words with care. "Perhaps we should discuss it further when you visit this weekend." "Perfect. I'll bring some ideas on how we could make it all work. I've already been thinking about room assignments and how we could maximize the space for efficiency." Room assignments. He had been plotting this takeover from the very day I signed the purchase agreement. After we ended the call, I poured myself a glass of wine, a particularly fine Bordeaux I had been cellaring for a special occasion. Clay's visit this weekend would most certainly qualify. The security team arrived the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I watched from my study window as they unloaded van after van of sophisticated equipment: cameras, sensors, recording devices, control panels, enough technology to monitor a small corporate headquarters. "Mr. Hartman," Tyler explained as his crew worked diligently, "this system will record everything: video, audio, motion patterns. You'll have a master control panel here in your study, but everything is also backed up to our secure cloud servers. If anyone attempts to tamper with the local equipment, we'll still have a complete record of all the recordings. And it's all completely legal? Absolutely. It's your house, your property, your right to record. Anyone who enters the premises is, by law, giving implied consent to be monitored. By Thursday evening, the installation was complete. My magnificent mansion was now a fortress of surveillance. Every room was monitored, every conversation recorded, every movement tracked. Clay Pierce was about to step into the most sophisticated trap ever designed for a greedy son-in-law. I spent Friday morning familiarizing myself with the system, learning the controls and studying the camera angles. The quality was astounding, crystal-clear video, with audio so sensitive it could capture a whispered conversation from across a large room. That afternoon, I called Marcus to provide him with an update. "Are you certain this is all above board?" he asked, his judicial caution evident. "Completely. It's my property, my home, my right to record. Anyone who sets foot inside is presumed to consent to surveillance. And what is your strategy for this weekend?" "I am going to be the consummate host. Gracious, a bit overwhelmed, and perhaps even thankful for Clay's overbearing assistance. I want him to feel so confident, so utterly secure in his machinations, that he says and does things he can never, ever take back." "Arthur," Marcus said, a note of gravity in his voice, "you realize you are, in essence, laying a snare for your own family." "Marcus," I replied, a cold resolve settling over me, "they set the trap the moment they decided they were entitled to my home. I'm just ensuring they fall into it head first." Saturday morning, I dressed with meticulous care. A soft, heather-gray cashmere sweater that made me appear gentle and approachable, perfectly styled silver hair, my signature watch, and just a hint of manufactured uncertainty in my expression, as if I might genuinely need the kind of help Clay was so desperate to provide. I was ready for battle. They arrived precisely at 3 p.m., and from the instant I opened the door, it was clear that Clay had arrived prepared for a coronation. He swept into my foyer, as if he already held the deed, wearing a tailored blazer that likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. Trailing behind him was the Pierce family brigade. Rebecca, his mother, in an expensive dress that couldn't quite conceal her middle-class origins. Leonard, his father, clutching a bottle of wine like a diplomatic offering. And Jessica, his 2 8-year-old sister, her eyes already darting around the room, calculating the value of my possessions. "Arthur, darling," Clay said, planting a kiss on my cheek with a theatrical warmth meant for an audience. "This place is even more magnificent than I remembered. Mom brought her famous lasagna. And Dad is eager to see your gardens." "How wonderful," I said, playing my part to perfection. "Please, come in. Make yourselves at home." As they settled into my living room, I observed how instinctively they arranged themselves. Clay took the antique wingback chair that had been my favorite. Rebecca began examining the hand-painted porcelain figures on the mantelpiece, and Leonard was studying the crown molding with the critical eye of someone estimating renovation costs. Only Jessica seemed genuinely impressed, rather than acquisitive. She stood at the tall, mullioned windows, gazing out at the grounds with an expression approaching awe. "This is like something from a movie," she murmured. "How much land do you have here, Mr. Hartman?" 12 acres, I replied. "The previous owners used to raise thoroughbreds." "Horses?" Jessica repeated, and I could practically see the dollar signs light up in her eyes. "That's a lot of space for just one person." "Jessica," Leonard scolded, but there was no real conviction in his tone. "Don't be impolite." "What?" "I'm just saying, it's a big place for someone to manage all by himself." Clay shot her a silencing look, but the sentiment had been expressed. In one unguarded remark, Jessica had laid bare the family's collective thinking that I was too old, too solitary, too overwhelmed to be deserving of what I had spent my entire life working to achieve. "You know, Arthur," Leonard said, settling into my late wife's favorite leather armchair with the casual air of a man who felt he belonged there. "Clay mentioned that you might be open to some assistance around here. I have some experience with property management, and I would be more than happy to take a look at your maintenance schedule." "That's very generous of you," I replied, pouring tea with hands that I deliberately allowed to tremble ever so slightly. "I must confess, the house is rather larger than what I'm used to." "Of course it is," Rebecca chimed in, her voice dripping with the kind of cloying sympathy one reserves for the elderly and infirm. "No one expects you to handle all of this on your own." From the corner of my eye, I saw Clay's faint, satisfied smile. Everything was proceeding exactly according to his plan. "Actually," Clay said, leaning forward with the earnest expression of someone about to unveil a life-altering proposal, "Danielle and I have been discussing it, and we believe we might have a solution that could be beneficial for everyone." "Oh? Well, you need help managing this beautiful home, and we need more space for our growing family." Clay's hand moved to his flat stomach in what I immediately recognized as a calculated, performative gesture. He wasn't pregnant yet, but he was already laying the foundation for that future argument. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I knew precisely what was coming. "A partnership," he declared. "We move in, just temporarily, to help you get settled and to handle the day-to-day management of the property. You get the support you need, and we get to be close enough to family to be of real assistance." "Move in," I repeated, as if the concept had never crossed my mind. "Just for a little while," Clay emphasized, "until you feel comfortable managing everything by yourself." "Until I was dead," he meant. "Or until they could engineer a way to make the arrangement permanent." "Where would you live?" "I mean, there are certainly enough bedrooms." "We were thinking of the primary suite," Clay said, and there it was, the raw, naked ambition finally brought into the light. "It's so spacious, and it would be perfect for when we start having children. You could take one of the smaller bedrooms, perhaps the one with the lovely garden view." The smaller bedroom. In my own house. After I had spent 63 years earning the right to sleep in the primary suite of my dreams. "That's certainly an idea to consider," I said carefully. "The primary suite has its own sitting area," Rebecca added, as if she were trying to sell me on the idea of being demoted in my own home. "You'd be so comfortable in there, Clay. And think about when the babies arrive. All that space for a nursery. Babies. They were already mapping out their dynasty within my walls. It would be like having live-in caretakers," Leonard added. "Professional property managers charge a fortune for the kind of services Clay and Danielle could provide for free." Free. As if allowing them to inherit my mansion would be some kind of favor to me. "You wouldn't have to worry about a single thing," Clay continued, his voice smooth and persuasive. "I'd handle all the household management. Danielle could take care of maintenance and repairs, and you could simply relax and enjoy your magnificent home." Relax while they systematically took over everything I had ever worked for. "It's so generous of you to offer," I said, and I truly meant it. They were being incredibly generous with my property, my space, and my life. "Family takes care of family," Clay replied, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. We spent the next hour touring the house, and I watched as the Pierce family mentally divided my possessions amongst themselves. Rebecca admired the formal dining room's crystal chandelier, remarking how perfect it would be for holiday entertaining. Leonard examined the library's built-in shelving, noting it could hold a lot of books or other collections. And Jessica was enthralled by the basement's potential. You could fit a whole home theater down here. But it was Clay who truly made himself at home. He opened the closets in my bedroom, inspected the fixtures in my bathroom, and stood at the large windows of the primary suite as if he were already deciding how to rearrange the furniture. "The natural light in here is incredible," he murmured, running his hand along the smooth marble of the windowsills. "And so much closet space. You could fit an entire wardrobe in here." "The previous owners certainly spared no expense," I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. "It's perfect for a couple," Clay went on. "Separate his and hers areas, plenty of room for a sitting area, and maybe even a small desk. Danielle could work from home." He was already inhabiting the space in his mind, already treating my personal sanctuary as his future domain. During dinner, the conversation became even more explicit about their plans. Leonard suggested that I might want to simplify my financial arrangements by putting the house in Danielle's name for tax purposes. Rebecca wondered if I truly needed all the formal furniture, since modern families, she claimed, preferred a more casual living style. Jessica even asked if I had ever considered renting out the guest bedrooms for some extra income. By 8 p.m., they had essentially mapped out my entire future without consulting me on a single point. "This has been a lovely evening," I said, as they finally began to prepare for their departure. "Thank you all for dinner and for your many suggestions regarding the house." "Think about our discussion," Clay said, kissing my cheek again. "I truly believe this arrangement could be perfect for everyone." "I will most certainly consider it." "Great. I'll call you tomorrow, and we can start making some specific plans." After they were gone, I went directly to my study and accessed the surveillance recordings from the afternoon. The system had captured everything. Every casual, entitled comment about my property, every assumption about my supposed incapacity, every greedy calculation, thinly veiled as familial concern. But the most damning evidence came from a conversation I had missed while I was in the kitchen preparing the tea. Clay, Leonard, and Rebecca had been alone in the living room, and their voices had been recorded with pristine clarity. "He's definitely losing his sharpness," Leonard had said. "Did you see how his hands were shaking when he poured the tea?" "It's sad, really," Rebecca had replied. "He's trying so hard to maintain his independence, but it's obvious he's completely overwhelmed. The good news is, he seems very open to our help," Clay had added. "I think if we frame this correctly, we can be moved in within a month." "What about Danielle?" Rebecca had asked. "Is she fully on board with this?" "Danielle will do whatever I tell her to do," Clay had replied with a chilling, casual contempt for his own wife. "She's always been too weak to stand up to either her father or me. As long as I manage this carefully, she'll support whatever I decide." I replayed that segment 3 times, savoring each and every word. Clay had not only revealed his sinister plans, he had revealed his true character, his contempt for Danielle, his manipulation of his family, and his arrogant assumption that I was too old and weak to defend myself. He was about to learn that the man who had built a multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up was anything but defenseless. I called Marcus that evening and played the recordings for him over the phone. "Arthur, this is perfect," he said when the audio concluded. "You have them on record discussing fraud, conspiracy to deprive you of your property, and conspiracy to take advantage of an elderly person. Is that enough for criminal charges? Not quite yet, but it's an excellent foundation. You need them to take an actual criminal action. Trespassing, theft, fraud, something tangible that goes beyond mere planning. How do I get them to cross that line?" Marcus laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "My dear friend, you don't get them to do anything. You simply give them enough rope to hang themselves." That night, I lay awake in my magnificent primary bedroom, the very one Clay had already claimed in his mind, and I began to plot the next phase of my campaign. Clay Pierce wanted my house. He was certainly welcome to try and take it, but he was about to discover that some battles come with a price far too high to pay. The next morning, I called Clay with an offer that I knew would be utterly irresistible to someone with his particular character flaws. "Clay, my boy, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," I began, carefully infusing my voice with just the right amount of elderly hesitation. "Your offer to help with the house? It really might be the most practical solution." "Oh, Arthur, I'm so glad you're considering it." His excitement was palpable, practically vibrating through the phone line. "I was hoping you'd come to realize how beneficial this arrangement could be for everyone. I was wondering if you and Danielle might like to come back this week to discuss the specifics, perhaps Tuesday evening?" "Absolutely. We could bring takeout and really sit down and map everything out properly." "That would be lovely. And Clay, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the primary suite. You're probably right. It would be far more practical for a younger couple." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Clay was likely performing a silent victory dance in his kitchen. "Are you sure, Arthur? I mean, I wouldn't want to displace you from your own bedroom." "Oh, it's far too much space for one person. I'd be perfectly comfortable in the garden room. The morning light in there is quite beautiful." That's incredibly generous of you. Family is family, my boy. Now, shall we say Tuesday at 7? After we hung up, I spent the remainder of Sunday planning what was to become the most comprehensive surveillance operation ever conducted against a greedy son-in-law. On Monday morning, I called Tyler Walsh from the security company. "Mr. Hartman, what can I do for you?" "I need to upgrade the system we just installed. I want recording devices in every single room, motion sensors that can track individual movements, and I want everything backed up to multiple secure servers." "That's quite an extensive setup. May I ask, what has prompted this upgrade?" "Let's just say I'm anticipating some very interesting visitors, and I want to ensure that we capture every single detail of their behavior. We can have an upgraded system fully installed by tomorrow afternoon. But Mr. Hartman, this level of surveillance is typically reserved for high-security government facilities." "Tyler," I said, my voice low and firm, "I am about to conduct an experiment in human avarice. I intend to document every single second of it." On Tuesday morning, I visited my lawyer to make some final preparations. If events unfolded as I anticipated, I would need legal documentation of several property-related matters. "Mr. Hartman," my attorney said as we reviewed the documents I had requested, "these papers essentially construct a legal fortress around your property rights. No one can claim ownership, residency rights, or any financial interest without your explicit, notarized written consent." "Perfect. And if someone were to attempt to establish residency or claim ownership fraudulently, they would be facing serious criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted theft, the kind of charges that come with significant prison time." That afternoon, I prepared my house as if it were a stage for a play. I secured valuables that I didn't want to risk being damaged, moved important documents to a safe deposit box, and made sure that every room was optimally lit for the hidden surveillance cameras. But the most crucial preparation was psychological. I stood in front of a mirror and practiced my performance. The grateful widower, slightly dazed and overwhelmed by his circumstances, pathetically eager for the support of his family. It was a role that would have deeply insulted me in any other context. But for this purpose, it was absolutely perfect. Clay and Danielle arrived at precisely 7 p.m., and I could see immediately that Clay had dressed for a celebration. He wore a sharp suit that was just formal enough to imply the importance of the occasion, and he carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who was on the verge of getting everything he had ever wanted. Danielle looked uneasy. But that was nothing new. My daughter had spent 41 years looking uncomfortable whenever she was expected to make a decision of any consequence. "Arthur, you look wonderful," Clay said, enveloping me in a theatrically warm embrace. "Are you excited about making this arrangement official?" "I'm nervous," I admitted, which was actually true, just not for the reasons he imagined. "It's a significant change, sharing my home after being alone for so long." "Change is good," Danielle said awkwardly. "And we'll be very respectful of your space." "My space? In my own house?" We settled in the living room with takeout from a local Thai restaurant, and Clay immediately produced a folder thick with documents. "I've been doing some research," he announced, "and I think the best way to handle this is to establish a formal living arrangement, something that protects everyone's interests." "What kind of arrangement?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, for tax and insurance purposes, it would be much simpler if Danielle and I were listed as co-residents with property management responsibilities. It would also be beneficial if we had joint access to the household accounts, just to streamline everything. Joint access to my accounts. Property management responsibilities." He wasn't even pretending this was a temporary situation anymore. "That sounds very official," I said. "It's just practical," Clay replied smoothly. "For instance, what if something were to happen to you? Danielle would need the legal authority to manage property matters, pay the bills, that sort of thing." "What if something happened to me?" "He was already planning for my death." "I suppose that makes sense." "Great. I've drafted some preliminary documents." Clay pulled a sheaf of papers from his folder with the practiced efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before. "Nothing legally binding, of course, just a framework we can use to get started." I accepted the papers and pretended to read them with great concentration, though I already knew what they would contain. Sure enough, Clay had essentially drafted a residential agreement for himself that granted him and Danielle residency rights, full property management authority, and access to my financial accounts for all household expenses. "This seems quite comprehensive," I remarked. "I wanted to make sure we covered all the bases. The last thing we'd want is any confusion about who is responsible for what." "Of course. And these management responsibilities?" "I would handle all the household matters. Staff coordination, maintenance scheduling, bill paying. Danielle could take care of any physical repairs or improvements. You wouldn't have to lift a finger." "Staff coordination. As if I had ever needed staff to manage my own life. It's very generous of you to take on so much responsibility." "That's what family is for," Clay replied, but I caught the fleeting glint of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. We spent the next hour reviewing his detailed plans for the house. He had already mapped out bedroom assignments, the primary suite for him and Danielle, the garden room for me, and the guest rooms for their future children and visiting Pierce family members. He had identified a list of necessary improvements, which were mostly changes that would systematically erase any trace of my personal taste from the house. He had even calculated a monthly household budget, all of which would be conveniently drawn from my accounts while being managed exclusively by him. "When were you thinking of making this transition?" I asked. "Well, there's no sense in waiting," Clay said. "We could start moving our things in this weekend. I've already given notice on our condo lease." He had already given notice before we had even had this conversation. "That's very efficient of you. I believe in planning ahead. Danielle and I have been so excited about this arrangement. We might have gotten a little carried away with the preparations." "What kind of preparations?" Clay and Danielle exchanged a brief, significant look that I pretended not to see. "Just Practical things, Danielle said quickly, looking at furniture placement, thinking about storage solutions. Clay has already picked out some new paint colors for the primary bedroom, she added, apparently oblivious to how incriminating that sounded. Paint colors? Just ideas, Clay interjected, shooting Danielle a warning glance. Nothing definite, but I thought a softer, more neutral palette might be more relaxing. The current burgundy is a bit intense. The current burgundy that I had specifically chosen because it reminded me of the library where my late wife, Teresa, had proposed to me 38 years ago. Change can be refreshing, I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. By 9 p.m., we had covered every single detail of their planned takeover. Clay had thought of everything, from transferring the utility bills into his name to establishing a new household bank account that he alone would manage. He had essentially drafted a blueprint for stealing my entire life. "This all sounds wonderful," I said as they prepared to leave. "Should I have my attorney review these documents?" "Oh, there's no need for that," Clay said quickly. A little too quickly. "These are just informal agreements between family. Lawyers would only complicate things unnecessarily." Of course, he didn't want lawyers involved. Any competent lawyer would immediately recognize fraud when they saw it. "You're probably right. Families should be able to work these things out amongst themselves." "Exactly. We'll start moving our things in on Saturday morning. I can't wait to really make this place feel like home." After they had gone, I went straight to my study and reviewed the surveillance footage from the evening. The cameras had captured it all. Clay's folder filled with fraudulent documents, Danielle's uncomfortable admissions about the preparations they had made without my knowledge or consent, and most damningly, Clay's clear statement that they had already terminated their condo lease based on their assumptions about my property. But the most crucial piece of evidence came from a conversation they had while I was in the kitchen fetching dessert. The audio was perfectly clear. "Are you sure he's really going to go through with this?" Danielle had asked, her voice laced with anxiety. "Please," Clay had scoffed. "He's desperate for help and too proud to admit it. Besides, once we're moved in, what's he going to do? Throw us out? It just seems like we're moving awfully fast." "Danielle, your father is nearly 70 years old and living by himself in a 14-room mansion. He needs us, whether he realizes it or not. And frankly, it's ridiculous for him to be hoarding all this space when we could be building our future here. But what if he changes his mind? He won't. And even if he tries, possession is 9/10 of the law. Once we're established as residents, he can't just kick us out. Possession is 9/10 of the law." Clay wasn't just planning to move in. He was planning to establish squatters' rights in my own home. I called Marcus immediately. "They're planning to establish residency this weekend," I told him. He specifically mentioned that once they're moved in, I won't be able to remove them. "Perfect," Marcus said. "Let them do it. And when they do, they'll be committing multiple felonies that we can document with your surveillance system. Arthur, this is exactly what we needed. A concrete criminal action that goes beyond mere planning. What charges are we looking at? Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft, trespassing, and possibly elder abuse. If we can prove they're taking advantage of your supposed vulnerability, with the recordings you have, we'll have enough evidence to put them away for years. How long do I let this continue? Give them enough time to truly commit to their crimes. Let them move in. Let them start making changes to the house. Let them get comfortable. The more they do, the stronger our case will become." That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from a keen sense of anticipation. Clay Pierce thought he was about to steal my house. Instead, he was about to walk directly into the most sophisticated legal trap ever set for a family member. By Saturday morning, He would begin the process of systematically destroying his own life, one felony at a time. And I would be watching every single moment of it. If you're finding yourself on the edge of your seat watching Arthur's plan unfold, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of revenge and justice. But I want to pause here and talk about something important: the difference between justice and revenge in your own life. Sometimes, like Arthur, we need to protect ourselves from people who see our kindness as a weakness. Our book, Asterisk, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, Asterisk, teaches you how to set boundaries that protect your peace without compromising your core values. It's not about getting even, it's about getting smart. Click the link in the description to learn strategies that will help you handle difficult people and situations with wisdom and strength. Now, let's see what happens when Clay makes his biggest mistake yet. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made my gardens look like a painting. I was sipping coffee in my breakfast nook, watching the squirrels industriously gather acorns from beneath the ancient oak trees, when the first moving truck rumbled up my circular driveway. It was 8:30 a.m. I had been awake since 5, mentally preparing for what would either be the most satisfying day of my life or the beginning of the most elaborate criminal case in the history of the county family court. From my kitchen window, I watched Clay direct the movers with the proprietary air of a man who already owned the estate. He was dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that likely cost more than the movers earned in a week, pointing imperiously toward my front door as if he were guiding them into his own home. Danielle trailed behind him, looking as uncomfortable as ever, but carrying a box labeled "Primary Bedroom" in Clay's neat, precise handwriting. I opened the front door before they had a chance to ring the bell, greeting them with the kind of warm, avuncular smile that had disarmed business rivals for decades. "Good morning. You're certainly early birds." "Arthur." Clay kissed my cheek with a theatrical enthusiasm. "We are so excited to get started. I hope you don't mind. I hired professional movers to make the transition as smooth as possible." Professional movers to steal my house. The sheer audacity was almost something to be admired. "How very thoughtful of you. Should I try to stay out of the way?" "Oh, don't be silly. This is your home too, though you might want to avoid the stairs while they're moving the heavy furniture." "My home too. How very generous of him to grant me partial ownership of my own property." For the next 4 hours, I observed the Pierce family invasion with the detached fascination of a scientist watching an experiment unfold. Clay had brought enough belongings to furnish a small house. Furniture, artwork, kitchen gadgets, even a complete set of monogrammed towels for the primary bathroom. But it was his behavior, not his possessions, that provided the most damning evidence. "The dining room table needs to go into storage," he instructed the movers, referring to my grandmother's antique mahogany table, an heirloom I had inherited 40 years ago. "We'll be using our own furniture for entertaining." "Their own furniture for entertaining in my house." "What about these paintings?" one of the movers asked, gesturing toward the oil portraits of my ancestors that had graced the foyer for 3 generations. "Storage," Clay replied without a moment's hesitation. "We'll be redecorating with a more modern aesthetic." I stood silently in the hallway, watching as strangers carried away pieces of my family's history, all at the command of a man who had been in my life for exactly 3 years. "Where would you like me to put Mr. Hartman's personal items from the primary bedroom?" another mover inquired. "Oh, I've got that handled," Clay said, appearing with several cardboard boxes. "Everything's already been packed and labeled for the garden room." He had packed my personal belongings, my clothes, my photographs of Teresa, my private papers all boxed up by his hands and relegated to a smaller bedroom in my own house. The surveillance system was capturing every single moment, every casual assumption of ownership, every decision made without my consent. But more than that, it was documenting the systematic theft of my home by someone I had once welcomed as family. By noon, the physical transformation was complete. Clay and Danielle's furniture now occupied my living spaces. Their art hung on my walls. Their personal effects filled my closets and cabinets. The primary bedroom, the sanctuary where I had planned to spend my golden years, had been completely commandeered by a man who had never contributed a single dollar to its purchase. But the most revealing moment came during lunch, when Clay gathered his family around my kitchen table, now their kitchen table, to celebrate their successful invasion. "I can't believe how perfectly everything fits," Rebecca Pierce gushed, admiring the way Clay had rearranged my kitchen to accommodate his own high-end appliances. "It's like the house was designed for us," Clay agreed, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Everything just feels so right." "The primary bedroom is incredible," Jessica added. "That bathroom is bigger than my entire apartment." "What about Arthur?" Leonard asked, glancing toward the garden room where my belongings had been unceremoniously moved. "Is he comfortable with all these changes?" "He's fine," Clay replied dismissively. "He knows this arrangement makes the most sense. Besides, he's getting older. He doesn't need all that space anyway." Getting older. As if my age somehow negated my right to the home I had purchased with my own money. "It's going to be so nice having room for the grandchildren when they start arriving," Rebecca said, running her hands along my marble countertops, as if she were already planning future holiday dinners. Grandchildren, they were planning for generations of Pierce family occupation in my home. "The guest wing will be perfect for when you and Dad visit," Clay told his parents. "You could stay for weeks at a time." Weeks at a time. They weren't just stealing my house. They were converting it into a Pierce family compound. That evening, after the movers had departed and the Pierce family had finally left to allow the new residents to settle in, I retreated to the garden room that was now my designated living quarters. It was a pleasant room, with large windows that overlooked my rose gardens and enough space for a queen-sized bed and a small sitting area. In any other house, it would have been perfectly comfortable, but it wasn't the primary suite I had earned. It wasn't the space I had dreamed of, planned for, and purchased with the money I had spent 60 years of my life accumulating. From my new, smaller quarters, I could hear Clay and Danielle moving about the house, claiming spaces, making decisions, and settling into their stolen kingdom. The primary bedroom, where I had intended to spend my final decades, was now occupied by people who had contributed nothing to its acquisition and everything to its theft. I opened my laptop and reviewed the day's surveillance footage. The cameras had captured it all. Clay directing the removal of my furniture, his casual disposal of my family heirlooms, his arrogant assumptions about my future living arrangements, and, most importantly, his family's explicit discussions about their permanent residence and multi-generational occupation of my home. But the most incriminating evidence was still to come. The next day, Clay would begin to implement the financial aspects of his plan. The joint accounts, the household management, the systematic takeover of my economic independence. And I would be watching every illegal moment of it. I called Marcus at 9 p.m. after Clay and Danielle had finally ceased their furniture rearranging above my head. "How did the invasion go?" he asked. "Perfectly," I replied. "They've moved in completely, removed all of my belongings from the primary bedroom, and have begun treating the house as if they own it. The surveillance system captured everything." "Excellent. Now comes the really interesting part. The financial fraud. Once they start accessing your accounts or making unauthorized changes to your property titles, we'll have them on federal charges." "How much longer do I let this continue?" "Give them a week," Marcus advised. "Let them get comfortable. Let them make mistakes. Let them commit crimes they can't take back. The more evidence we have, the more devastating the consequences will be. After we hung up, I sat in my smaller bedroom, listening to the sounds of Clay and Danielle settling into my primary suite. I could hear them talking, laughing, and planning their future in the very space I had bought to house my own dreams. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a temporary, emotional, and counterproductive state. What I felt was something far more dangerous. A patient, calculated satisfaction. Clay Pierce had just committed the first of many felonies that would utterly destroy his life. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully manipulated a lonely old man into surrendering his home. Instead, he had just walked into a trap that would follow him for the rest of his days. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of committing financial fraud, and I would be gathering the evidence that would ultimately put him in prison. The real war was just beginning. Sunday morning, I woke in my garden room to the sound of Clay rearranging furniture in what used to be my primary bedroom. The irony was not lost on me. I was being awakened in my own house by a man who was about to commit multiple felonies before he even had breakfast. I dressed carefully in a soft blue cashmere sweater and my best watch, then made my way to the kitchen where Clay was already brewing coffee in the new high-tech machine he had installed to replace my perfectly functional one. "Good morning, Arthur. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. The garden room is quite comfortable." "I'm so glad." Danielle and I barely slept a wink. We were just so excited about finally being home. Home. He had been here less than 24 hours, and he was already calling my house his home. "I was thinking," Clay continued, pulling a folder of papers from his briefcase that I recognized from Tuesday's dinner. "We should probably take care of some of the administrative details today. Bank accounts, household bills, that sort of thing." Administrative details. Remember, we discussed setting up joint accounts for household expenses? I've done some research, and I think the simplest approach would be to add Danielle and me as signatories to your main accounts. Signatories to my accounts. He wanted legal access to all of my money. "That does sound efficient," I said carefully. "Great. I've already prepared the necessary paperwork. We just need your signature and then a trip to the bank tomorrow." He had already prepared the paperwork to access my financial accounts without asking, without my consent, based entirely on the arrogant assumption that I was too old and weak to manage my own money. What exactly would this arrangement entail? Oh, just practical things. I'd take over paying all the household bills, managing maintenance expenses, that sort of thing. You wouldn't have to worry about any of the day-to-day financial management. I wouldn't have to worry because I would no longer have access. And Danielle would be involved how? Mainly as a backup. You know how I am with details. I'd handle most of the actual management. But it's always good to have two people with access in case of emergencies. In case of emergencies, or in case they decided to clean out my accounts and disappear. I see. And this would be temporary, just until I'm more comfortable with the house? Exactly. Just until you're settled in and feeling more confident about managing everything, which meant never. We spent the next hour reviewing Clay's detailed financial plans for my life. He had calculated my household expenses, identified unnecessary expenditures that could be eliminated, mostly things that I enjoyed, and established what he called a reasonable monthly allowance for my personal needs, an allowance from my own money, managed by someone who had contributed nothing to earning it. "I think this arrangement will be so much less stressful for you," Clay said, looking over his itemized list of my future financial restrictions. "No more worrying about bills or investments or any of those complicated financial matters. It's very thoughtful of you to take on such a significant responsibility. That's what family is for. And honestly, Arthur, I think you'll find it liberating not to have all that financial pressure. Financial pressure. Managing the fortune I had spent 60 years of my life building was now being characterized as a pressure from which I needed to be liberated. That afternoon, while Clay was out shopping for additional household items, charged to my credit card naturally, I reviewed the surveillance footage from our morning conversation. The audio was crystal clear. Clay explicitly discussing his plans to take control of my bank accounts, to manage my finances without any oversight, and to establish his complete authority over my economic independence. More importantly, he had done it all without any suggestion that these were temporary measures, or that I would retain any meaningful control over my own money. But the real criminal behavior began when Danielle returned from what Clay had described as running errands. "Did you get everything taken care of?" Clay asked her as she entered the kitchen, where I was pretending to read a magazine. "Most of it. The utility companies will transfer the accounts to our names by the end of the week. I also stopped by the insurance office. They said we can add the property to our homeowner's policy without any problems." "Our homeowner's policy? For my house? What about the other thing?" Clay asked, glancing meaningfully in my direction. "I talked to a guy who works for a property management company. He said that if we establish legal residency and start handling all the maintenance, we could probably claim tenant rights after about 6 months. Tenant rights? In my own home. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were actively researching the legal mechanisms to make their theft permanent." "That's wonderful," Clay replied. "Did he mention anything about?" He lowered his voice, but not enough to evade the sensitive microphones hidden throughout the room. "What if he becomes incapacitated? Memory issues, health problems, that sort of thing?" "He said that with the right documentation, we could probably get power of attorney, especially if there's a documented pattern of behavior showing that he can't manage his own affairs independently." Power of attorney. They were already planning to have me declared legally incompetent so they could steal everything. "We'll need to be careful about that," Clay said. "Document everything. Show that he's becoming forgetful, maybe having trouble making decisions." "Are you sure about this?" Danielle's voice was barely a whisper. "It seems like we're moving really fast." "Danielle, your father is sitting on millions of dollars of assets that he is too old to properly manage. This house alone is worth more than we'll ever make in our entire lifetimes. We would be foolish not to protect our family's future." Protect their family's future by systematically destroying mine. That evening, Clay presented me with a stack of documents that represented the most comprehensive plan for financial fraud I had ever encountered. "I've organized everything we discussed," he said, spreading the papers across my dining room table like a seasoned executive closing a major deal. "Bank signature cards, utility transfer forms, insurance updates, and a general power of attorney form, just in case." "Power of attorney? Oh, that's just a precaution. In case you're ever in the hospital or something, and we need to handle urgent matters. It's standard for family arrangements like this. Standard for families who are planning to commit elder abuse." This all seems quite thorough. I believe in being prepared. The last thing we'd want is some legal complication that prevents us from taking care of you properly. Taking care of me by taking everything I owned. I pretended to review the documents with great care, though I had already recognized them for what they were. Instruments of financial enslavement designed to transfer complete control of my entire estate to people who had done nothing to earn it. "The power of attorney seems quite broad," I observed. "That's intentional. It gives us the flexibility to handle any situation that might arise. Medical decisions, financial transactions, property management, everything you might need help with as you get older." As I get older. He was speaking about my future cognitive decline, as if it were both inevitable and imminent. I suppose it makes sense to plan ahead. Exactly. And Arthur, I want you to know how much this means to Danielle and me. Having the opportunity to take care of you, to make sure you're comfortable and secure, it's really an honor. An honor. Stealing my fortune was an honor. You're very kind, Clay. We're family. And family takes care of each other, no matter what. No matter what, including whether the care was wanted, needed, or requested. That night, I called Marcus from the garden room that was now my prison. They've moved beyond planning, I told him. They are implementing full financial fraud, researching tenant rights, and actively discussing having me declared incompetent. Perfect. How much documentation do you have? Everything. Video, audio, and written evidence of their plans. They have essentially confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse, all while sitting in my own house. Arthur, this is exactly what we need. With this level of evidence, we can press federal charges. They're looking at serious prison time. How much longer? Give them 1 more week. Let them complete the financial takeover. Let them get comfortable with their crime spree. The more they steal, the longer they'll be in prison. And then we spring the trap and watch their entire world collapse around them. As I hung up the phone, I could hear Clay and Danielle in the primary bedroom, talking and laughing about their successful day of committing felonies. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated a helpless old man into surrendering his entire life's work. Instead, they had just created enough evidence to put themselves in federal prison for decades. The countdown to their destruction had begun. 1 week later, I woke before dawn, with the deep satisfaction of a man whose months of meticulous planning were about to reach their spectacular conclusion. Today, Clay Pierce would discover that his intended victim was, in fact, his predator. I dressed with particular care. A navy blue suit that conveyed authority, my late wife's favorite watch, and diamond cufflinks that caught the morning light like chips of ice. If you are going to destroy someone's life, you should at least look elegant while doing it. Over the past week, Clay had completed his takeover with a breathtaking thoroughness. He had transferred the utilities into his name, added himself as a signatory to my bank accounts, begun managing my investment portfolio, and had even started accepting mail addressed to the Pierce Hartman residence, as if he were the primary owner and I was merely an afterthought. But yesterday had been the final straw. I had overheard him on the phone with a real estate attorney, inquiring about the legal process for transferring property ownership from an elderly person with diminished capacity to a family caretaker. He wasn't just stealing my house anymore. He was actively planning to have me declared incompetent so he could steal it legally. At 8 a.m., I made my final call to Marcus. "Are you ready?" my friend asked. "I've been ready for weeks. The evidence is overwhelming, the legal case is airtight, and frankly, I'm tired of being a prisoner in my own home. The police will arrive at noon. Detective Miller will be leading the investigation. I've briefed him on the situation, and he is very interested in reviewing your surveillance footage. What about Clay and Danielle? They will be arrested on multiple felony charges: fraud, conspiracy, attempted theft, elder abuse, enough to put them away for years. The federal prosecutor is particularly interested in the financial crimes." At 10 a.m., I called Clay into the living room under the pretense of discussing some household matters. "Arthur, you look lovely today," he said, settling into what used to be my favorite armchair. "That suit is very handsome on you." "Thank you, my boy. I wanted to talk to you about some concerns I've been having. Concerns about the arrangement we've made. I've been thinking that perhaps we moved too quickly." Clay's confident smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's only been a week, and I already feel as though I've lost control of my own home. You're managing my finances, making decisions about my property, even accepting mail addressed to your name. It feels less like help and more like a takeover. Arthur, that's not fair. Everything we have done has been for your benefit. Has it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks as though you have systematically assumed control of everything I own. Clay's expression hardened, and for the first time since I had known him, he dropped the pretense of caring about my welfare. Arthur, you need to be realistic about your situation. You are nearly 70 years old, living alone in a house that is far too big for you to manage. Danielle and I are giving you the support you need, whether you appreciate it or not. The support I need, or the assets you want? That's a terrible thing to say. We have sacrificed our own independence to take care of you. Sacrificed your independence? You have moved into a 14-room mansion rent-free and assumed control of a multi-million-dollar estate. Where exactly is the sacrifice in that? Clay stood up abruptly, his facade of familial devotion finally cracking completely. You know what, Arthur? I am tired of pretending. Yes, this house is too big for one person. Yes, you are too old to manage your finances properly. And yes, Danielle and I deserve to benefit from the family wealth instead of watching you hoard it until you die. Deserve to benefit? We are your daughter's family. We are the next generation. Instead of sitting here all alone, guarding your money like some kind of dragon, you should be grateful that we are willing to take care of you. There it was. The raw, naked greed and entitlement that had been hiding behind his mask of concern all along. The surveillance system was capturing every single word of his confession. I see. So this was never about helping me. It was about taking what you believed you deserved. It was about being practical. You can't live forever, Arthur. When you die, everything will go to Danielle anyway. We're just making the transition more efficient. More efficient for whom? For everyone. You get taken care of. We get to build our future. And nobody has to pretend that a 70-year-old man needs 14 rooms and millions of dollars that he will never spend. At precisely 12 noon, the doorbell rang. Clay looked annoyed. Are you expecting someone? As a matter of fact, I am. I walked to the front door and opened it to reveal Detective Frank Miller, a stern-faced man in his 50s, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a federal agent whose badge identified him as belonging to the FBI. Mr. Hartman? Detective Miller said. We're here regarding the complaint you filed concerning financial fraud and elder abuse. Clay appeared behind me, his face suddenly pale. What's going on? Sir, are you Clay Pierce? Yes, but I don't understand. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted theft, and multiple violations of federal banking laws. The color drained completely from Clay's face as the detective began to read him his rights. This is insane. Arthur, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. I'm afraid there's no misunderstanding, Clay. I have been documenting your crimes for weeks. My crimes? I've been taking care of you. You have been stealing from me. There is a difference. Danielle appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion, and her face went white when she saw the police officers. Danielle Hartman? The federal agent asked. Yes, you are also under arrest. As they handcuffed my daughter and my son-in-law in the marble foyer of my home, I felt the profound satisfaction of a plan executed to absolute perfection. Every moment had been captured on surveillance, every crime documented, every lie exposed. Arthur! Clay screamed as they led him toward the door. You can't do this. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, Clay. What you did to me was criminal. And now you are going to face the consequences. You set us up. You manipulated us. I gave you every opportunity to behave with honesty and integrity. You chose to commit crimes instead. Danielle, do something. He's destroying our lives." But Danielle was staring at me with an expression approaching awe. For the first time in her 41 years, she was seeing her father as he truly was, not the aging widower who needed her protection, but the formidable man who had built an empire and was not about to let anyone steal it from him. "Father," she said quietly, as the officers led her away. "I'm sorry. I know you are, Danielle, but sorry does not undo fraud." After they were gone, Detective Miller stayed behind to review some of the evidence. "Mr. Hartman, I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of family fraud I have ever seen. Your surveillance system captured everything. I wanted to be absolutely certain that there would be no question about their guilt. There won't be. With this evidence, the prosecutor is confident of a conviction on all charges. They're looking at significant prison time. Good. If you don't mind me asking, how long were you planning this?" I smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Detective, I have been planning this since the moment Clay walked into my house and assumed he could take it from me. Some people mistake age for weakness. Clay Pierce just learned how wrong that assumption can be. That evening, I sat in my primary bedroom reclaimed, cleansed, and restored to my personal taste and watched the news coverage of the arrests. A prominent local couple was arrested today on charges of elder abuse and financial fraud, the reporter announced. Clay and Danielle Pierce are accused of systematically defrauding Pierce's father-in-law of his multi-million-dollar estate. Pierce, not even Hartman. They had already changed their names in the official records, as if Danielle were no longer my daughter. The news footage showed Clay being led away in handcuffs, his designer clothes and perfect hair, a stark contrast to the criminal charges he now faced. The man who thought he was smart enough to steal my life's work was about to spend the next decade in federal prison. My phone rang. It was Marcus, calling with updates from his contacts in the prosecutor's office. "They are not offering any plea deals," he told me. "With the evidence you provided, they want the maximum possible sentences. Clay is looking at 15 to 20 years. Danielle, at 10 to 15. And the financial recovery? Complete restitution, plus penalties. They will have to pay back everything they attempted to steal, plus interest and damages. They will be bankrupt when they get out of prison." Perfect. Clay Pierce had wanted my fortune. Instead, he had lost his freedom, his future, and any chance of ever achieving financial recovery. What about the house? Completely secure. The fraudulent documents they created have been voided, and your property rights are absolute. No one will ever be able to challenge your ownership again. I hung up the phone and walked through my mansion room by room, reclaiming every space that had been temporarily occupied by thieves. The primary bedroom, where Clay had slept for 1 week, would be deep cleaned and redecorated. The kitchen, where he had plotted my financial enslavement, would be restored to my preferences. The living room, where his family had celebrated their imagined victory, would be fumigated of their presence. But most importantly, the house was mine again, completely, absolutely, and permanently mine. Clay Pierce had thought he was smart enough to steal from me. Instead, he had walked into a trap that would define the rest of his life. Some lessons cost more than others. His had cost him everything. Viewers, this is where justice gets truly satisfying. When the people who think they're smarter than everyone else discover they've been outplayed by someone they underestimated. If you're dealing with manipulative people in your own life, remember Arthur's lesson. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And never let anyone convince you that you're too old or too weak to protect what's yours. Our book? Asterisk. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. Asterisk. has specific strategies for dealing with financial manipulators and family predators. These aren't just theoretical concepts. They're practical tools for protecting yourself from people who see your kindness as weakness. Click the link in the description and learn how to build your own fortress of protection. Now, let's see the final consequences of Clay's greed. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, watching Clay Pierce receive the education and consequences he should have gotten decades earlier. The trial had been everything I had hoped for, and more. 3 weeks of testimony, during which my surveillance footage played like a feature film of a man systematically destroying his own life through sheer greed and arrogance. Clay's defense attorney, an expensive lawyer his father had somehow scraped together the money to hire, had tried every strategy in the book. He had painted his client as a concerned son-in-law merely trying to help an elderly relative. He had suggested that I had manipulated the situation to entrap innocent family members. He had even attempted to argue that Clay's actions constituted caregiving rather than fraud. None of it mattered. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, and too damning. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Rodriguez, had presented the case with surgical precision. She played hour after hour of surveillance footage, showing Clay and his family planning their takeover, implementing their schemes, and celebrating their anticipated victory. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Rodriguez had said in her closing argument, "this case is about the most vulnerable among us, our elderly citizens, and what happens when family members decide that love and respect matter less than money and property." She played key moments from the recordings. Clay dismissing my capacity to manage my own affairs. Danielle researching tenant rights in my house. The Pierce family dividing my possessions among themselves as if I were already dead. "The defendants didn't just steal money," Rodriguez continued. "They stole dignity, independence, and security from a man who had worked his entire life to earn those things. They treated Arthur Hartman not as a family member deserving of respect, but as an obstacle to their inheritance." The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Clay had collapsed when the verdict was read, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. Danielle had simply stared straight ahead, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening to her life. Now, 6 months after their arrest, sentencing day had finally arrived. Judge Helen Monroe was a woman in her 60s who had built her reputation on delivering uncompromising sentences to white-collar criminals. She had reviewed every piece of evidence, listened to every argument, and studied the psychological evaluations that painted Clay as a calculating predator rather than a misguided family member. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Monroe began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted theft, and multiple violations of federal banking laws. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement?" Clay stood on shaking legs, supported by his attorney. For a fleeting moment, I thought he might finally show some genuine remorse. Instead, he delivered what was obviously a coached statement about accepting responsibility and asking for mercy. "Your Honor, I know my actions were wrong, and I deeply regret the pain I have caused Mr. Hartman. I was only trying to help a family member, but I understand now that my methods were inappropriate." Inappropriate. He was calling systematic fraud inappropriate. Judge Monroe listened to this performance with visible skepticism. "Mr. Pierce, the court has reviewed the extensive evidence in this case, including hours of surveillance footage that captures your own words describing your intentions. You were not trying to help Mr. Hartman. You were trying to steal his entire estate." The judge consulted her notes before continuing. "The evidence shows a pattern of calculated deception spanning several months. You moved into Mr. Hartman's home without permission, assumed control of his finances through fraudulent documents, and explicitly discussed plans to have him declared incompetent so you could steal his property legally. Clay swayed slightly, gripping the defendant's table for support. This court finds that your actions represent a particularly egregious form of elder abuse. The exploitation of a family relationship to commit financial crimes against a vulnerable person. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. On the charge of elder abuse, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, to run consecutively. On the charges of attempted theft and banking violations, this court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, to run consecutively. 25 years. Clay Pierce would be nearly 60 years old when he was first eligible for parole. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay complete restitution to Mr. Hartman in the amount of $2.3 million, representing the value of the assets you attempted to steal, plus interest and penalties. Clay's knees buckled, and he had to be supported by his attorney and a bailiff. Danielle's sentencing was next, and while her sentence was slightly lighter, 15 years in total, it was still enough to ensure that my daughter would spend the prime of her adult life in federal prison. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the brilliant sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice had been served, and that, in itself, was commentary enough. 1 year after Clay's sentencing, I was living exactly the life I had envisioned when I first bought the mansion. My days were filled with the quiet pleasures of a man who had survived every battle he had ever fought and had won most of them. I woke each morning in my primary bedroom, the one Clay had occupied for exactly 7 days before discovering that stealing from me carried a price higher than he had ever imagined. The room had been completely redecorated. Every trace of his presence had been erased and replaced with furnishings that reflected my taste, my achievements, and my victory. The house itself had become exactly what I had intended it to be, a monument to survival and success. I had hired a small staff to help with the maintenance, not because I couldn't manage on my own, but because I could afford to live exactly as I pleased. But the sweetest victory wasn't the house or the money or even the justice. It was the knowledge that I had protected myself completely from people who had tried to prey on what they perceived as my weakness. The legal aftermath had been thorough and devastating for the Pierce family. Beyond Clay and Danielle's prison sentences, the civil restitution had bankrupted them completely. Leonard and Rebecca Pierce had been forced to sell their home to help pay the legal fees, and Jessica had lost her job when her employer learned of her family's criminal conviction. I received periodic updates through Marcus's contacts in the legal system. Clay was struggling with prison life, unable to adapt to the loss of the control and luxury he had always considered his birthright. He had been written up twice for refusing work assignments, and once for arguing with a guard about the quality of the food in the cafeteria. Danielle, according to the same reports, was adapting better to incarceration. She had always been passive, content to let others make decisions for her, and prison provided the kind of structured environment where passivity was actually an advantage. The most unexpected outcome of the entire ordeal was the relationship I developed with my neighbors and the broader community. The trial had been extensively covered by the local media, and rather than seeing me as a victim, people seemed to view me as something of a folk hero, the elderly man who had outwitted his greedy relatives and sent them to prison. I received dozens of letters from other seniors who had faced similar situations with their own family members. But I wasn't interested in becoming a spokesperson for elder rights or starting a foundation to help abuse victims. I had solved my own problem with surgical precision, and that was enough. On the anniversary of Clay's sentencing, I threw myself a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just a few close friends, excellent wine, and dinner served in the dining room where Clay had once planned to host Pierce family gatherings. Marcus raised his glass in a toast. To Arthur Hartman, who proved that the best revenge is living well and sending your enemies to prison. Later that evening, I sat in my study, reviewing the surveillance footage from exactly 1 year ago, the night Clay and Danielle had been arrested in my foyer. Watching the look on Clay's face as he realized his crimes had been discovered never got old. I closed the laptop and walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks. In the morning, I would wake up in my own bedroom, in my own house, surrounded by my own possessions, protected by my own money. Clay Pierce would wake up in a federal prison cell, wearing clothes provided by the Department of Corrections, eating food prepared by other inmates, and facing another day of a 25-year sentence. Justice, I reflected, wasn't always swift, but when it finally arrived, it could be absolutely perfect. 5 years have passed since Clay Pierce walked into my mansion, thinking he could steal it from me. 5 years since he learned that some men bite back harder than others ever expect. I'm sitting in my study now, the same room where I planned his destruction with the methodical precision that built my fortune. At 68, I am more formidable than I was at 63, sharpened by victory and polished by the knowledge that I can defend everything I have earned. The house is exactly as I've always wanted it. My staff is efficient and loyal, paid well enough to ensure their discretion and competence. Every room reflects my taste, my achievements, and my absolute authority over my own domain. This morning, I received news that Clay Pierce had been denied parole for the second time. 20 years left on his sentence. He'll be 78 years old when he's finally eligible for release, older than I was when he first tried to steal from me. The parole board's report made for fascinating reading. Clay had apparently spent his first few years in prison, demanding special treatment, filing complaints about the conditions, and generally behaving as if incarceration were a temporary inconvenience. It had taken nearly 3 years for the reality of his situation to penetrate his deep-seated sense of entitlement. But it was too little, too late. His crimes had been too calculated, his victim too sympathetic, and his lack of genuine remorse too obvious. Danielle had been granted parole after serving 8 years of her 15-year sentence. I had received notification of her release, along with a request to meet that I had ignored completely. She was living in a halfway house now, working at a grocery store, and learning to rebuild a life that would never again include trust funds or family wealth. She had written me several letters over the years, attempting to apologize and to rebuild some kind of relationship. I had read each one carefully, then filed them away without responding. Danielle had made her choice when she decided to help her husband steal from me. Some people might call my refusal to forgive harsh. I called it logical. Trust, once broken by theft and betrayal, cannot be repaired with letters and apologies. The Pierce family had never recovered from the shame and financial devastation. Leonard had died of a heart attack 2 years into Clay's sentence. Bankrupt and humiliated, Rebecca had moved across the country to live with a sister, but even there, the internet followed her. The Pierce family had wanted to claim my legacy. Instead, they had created a legacy of their own, one of greed, crime, and consequences that would follow them for generations. This afternoon, I was expecting a visitor. My nephew Peter, my late brother's son, was coming to see the house. Unlike my daughter, Peter had built his own successful career and had asked for nothing from the family wealth except the occasional Christmas dinner. He arrived precisely on time, a habit I appreciated. "Uncle Arthur," he said, embracing me with genuine affection, "this place is even more spectacular than you described." We spent an hour walking through the mansion, and I watched Peter's reaction with satisfaction. His appreciation was genuine, unstained by envy or calculation. He admired my art collection without appraising its value. He praised the architecture without calculating the square footage. I heard about what happened with Danielle and her husband, he said carefully as we sat overlooking my rose garden. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Are you sorry it happened, or sorry they got caught? Peter smiled, recognizing the sharpness that had made me successful in business and devastating to my enemies. I'm sorry you were put in a position where you had to protect yourself from your own family. That's the correct answer. As he prepared to leave, Peter hesitated at the door. And Uncle Arthur, I hope you know that not everyone in the family would have done what Danielle did. I know that, Peter. But I also know that trust, once broken, cannot be easily repaired. Danielle chose her husband over her family, and now she has to live with the consequences of that choice. After he left, I walked through my house in the fading afternoon light, appreciating the silence and the security that came from knowing that every inch of it was mine. In the primary bedroom, I opened the safe where I kept my most important documents. Among them was a thick folder labeled Pierce Criminal Case. Every piece of evidence from the prosecution that had destroyed my enemies. I didn't need to review the contents anymore. They had served their purpose, but I kept them as a reminder and as a warning to anyone else who might be foolish enough to mistake my age for weakness. I closed the safe and prepared for dinner. Tonight, I would eat alone in my beautiful dining room, served by staff who respected my authority, surrounded by possessions I had earned through decades of hard work and intelligent choices. Clay Pierce would eat in a prison cafeteria, surrounded by other criminals, counting the days until he was old enough to be released into a world that had moved on without him. I poured myself a glass of wine, a magnificent vintage that cost more than Clay made in a month of prison labor, and raised it in a toast to my empty dining room. To Arthur Hartman, I said aloud, who proved that some old men bite back. The wine tasted like everything I had ever wanted. And there you have it, Arthur Hartman's complete and total victory over people who thought they could steal his life's work. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a masterclass in protecting what you've earned and refusing to be anyone's victim, no matter what age they think makes you vulnerable. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever dealt with manipulative family members or people who mistake your kindness for weakness, then you absolutely need to read our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. This isn't just another self-help book. It's a comprehensive guide filled with real, practical strategies for dealing with financial manipulators, setting boundaries that actually stick, and building a life so strong that no one can tear it down. The book includes an entire section on recognizing the warning signs of family financial abuse, protecting your assets from predatory relatives, and documenting evidence if you ever need to take legal action. These aren't theoretical concepts. They're the same strategies that helped men like Arthur turn the tables on people who thought they were easy targets. Don't wait until you're facing your own Clay Pierce situation. Don't wait until someone is already trying to manipulate you out of what you've worked for. Get the tools you need to protect your peace, your assets, and your future right now. Click the link in the description below and start building your fortress of protection today. Remember what Arthur proved. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's living so well and so securely that your enemies can only watch from a distance while they face the consequences of their own choices. Age isn't weakness, experience isn't vulnerability, and politeness isn't permission to be taken advantage of. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.